3.
Merry Christmas and good morning, everyone. Our lovely Belle from the Scoodic Peninsula in Maine is saying welcome to Christmas 2020. I have chosen 3 carols for our time together today, and I have something to say about each of them, and then I'm going to play them, and if you have your hymnal, you can sing along. I'm going to play so that you can sing all the stanzas. The first carol is hymn 102, Once in Royal David City. I suspect many of you, first encountered this extraordinarily compelling carol by listening to the annual Christmas Eve broadcast from King's College Chapel in Cambridge, England. The ethereal sound of a single boy chorister singing the opening stanza of this carol in that unique and opulent acoustic is recognized throughout the world as the beginning of our annual Christmas celebration. One of the lesser-known traditions of this annual Festival of 9 Lessons and Carols, first observed in 1918, is that the choice of the boy to sing the opening stanza of this carol is only made minutes prior to the beginning of the service and its international broadcast. Of course, all the boys rehearse the carol, but the final decision as to whom specifically will sing the first stanza is not made until just before the service begins, thus avoiding any undue anxiety and nervousness on the part of the choristers in anticipation of singing the solo. The text of the carol is the work of Mrs. Cecil Frances Alexander, born in Dublin and the author of much poetry and many hymn texts. In fact, by the time she was 22, Mrs. Alexander had several of her hymn texts published in the hymn book of the Church of Ireland. Once in Royal David City first appeared in her collection entitled Hymns for Little Children, which was published in 1848. A primary purpose of this collection was to teach, musically and poetically, the essence of the Christian catechism. This carol reflects the meaning of the section of the Apostles' Creed which has the words, "Born of the Virgin Mary." The references to the Nativity of Jesus are included in all 6 stanzas of this carol. The music with which Mrs. Alexander's text is associated is that of Dr. Henry Gauntlet, a 19th century English organist who was formerly trained as a lawyer and practiced law until he was about 40, at which point he abandoned the law and devoted himself to music, serving as organist in several prominent London churches. He is credited with contributing a great deal to raise the standard of church music, both in the practice thereof and through his keen understanding and experience in designing and building pipe organs. So, let's sing together Hymn 102, the carol Once in Royal David City. Certainly, one of the most loved Christmas carols, particularly by Christians in New England, is O Little Town of Bethlehem. Written by the Right Reverend Phillips Brooks, a longtime rector of Trinity Church, Copley Square in Boston, from 1869 to 1891, and subsequently Bishop of the Diocese of Massachusetts, this lovely carol was written before Bishop Brooks came to Boston. It was during his tenure at the Church of the Holy Trinity in Philadelphia, where Phillips Brooks was, during that time, he was traveling in the Holy Land and found himself in Bethlehem on Christmas Eve of 1865. He attended the service at the Church of the Nativity there, where he was inspired to begin work on a new hymn, namely, O Little Town of Bethlehem. He did not finish the hymn until 3 years later in 1868. Since the late 19th century, this remarkable carol has been included in hundreds of hymn books of many different denominations throughout the world. There are actually 2 tunes associated with Phillips Brooks' text, and both of them are included in our hymnal, the hymnal 1982. However, the tune that was composed expressly for these words by Phillips Brooks was the creation of Louis H. Redner, who served as the organist and the superintendent of the Sunday school at the Church of the Holy Trinity in Philadelphia, where Brooks was rector. I know that I speak for a number of my friends in the profession of Episcopal Church music when I say that I'm delighted that the wedding of organist, choir master, and superintendent of the Sunday school doesn't seem to be a thing anymore. I can't imagine doing both of those jobs. In any case, I digress. The story of the birth of Redner's tune for this carol is somewhat dramatic. It seems that Phillips Brooks had invited Redner to compose a tune for his carol well ahead of Christmas in 1868. But Mr. Redner was unable to find adequate inspiration for the task, even as he prepared for a night's rest on Christmas Eve of that year. However, after just a few hours of sleep, he suddenly awoke, and the tune was already formed in his mind. And by the morning, he had completed the harmonization of the tune as well. In a letter written to a friend, Redner asserts that he heard the tune and text sung for the very first time on December 27th, just 2 days after Christmas in 1868. The carol with Redner's tune was first published in a hymnal for Episcopal Sunday schools known as The Church Porch. How about that? The name of a publication, The Church Porch. As evidence of the esteem with which this carol, its text by Phillips Brooks, and its tune by Louis Redner is held by the people of the United States, one need only realize that in 1907, when the cornerstone of the Washington National Cathedral, in what is now the Bethlehem Chapel, was laid, the carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem, was sung at that time. So this is hymn 79 in the hymnal, and we shall sing all 5 stanzas of O Little Town of Bethlehem. So we'll begin right away. And finally, on this Christmas morning, 2020, we turn our attention to hymn 99, Go Tell It on the Mountain. The unbridled joy and exuberance of this African-American spiritual is a result of the imagination of John Wesley Work II, the first African-American collector of folk songs and spirituals, and a distinguished choral conductor as well. John Work was a native of Nashville, Tennessee. He was sometimes known as John Wesley Work Jr., rather than the second. The name John Wesley Work II was taken up by some in order to distinguish John Wesley Work II from his son, who was John Wesley Work III. But never mind that. John Wesley Work II and John Wesley Work Jr. are the same person. He attended Fisk University, graduating in 1895, and then continued his studies at Harvard prior to accepting an appointment as instructor of Latin and history at Fisk University in 1904. With his wife and his brother Frederick, he began collecting slave songs and spirituals and eventually published them in a collection known as New Jubilee Songs as Sung by the Fisk Jubilee Singers in 1901. And then 6 years later, in 1907, a subsequent publication, New Jubilee Songs and Folk Songs of the American Negro, appeared. John Work II also served as the director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers and took that ensemble on a concert tour each year. It is profoundly disappointing to realize that because of negative feelings toward black folk music at Fisk, he was forced to resign his post there in 1923. Almost immediately, he was appointed president of Roger Williams University in Nashville and served there until his untimely death 2 years later in 1925. Since, for the most part, the composers of African-American spirituals are unknown, the source of the tune is less important than the type of tune. Based on performance practice, tempo, and rhythm, the tune for Go Tell It on the Mountain is that of a syncopated or swung melody in contrast to a call and response melody or a rather slow sorrow song. This tune was first published in an arrangement by the Canadian-American black composer, organist, pianist, and professor Nathaniel Dett, well known in musical circles and beyond. The version that we sing from the hymnal 1982 is an arrangement by Horace Boyer, one of the foremost scholars of African-American gospel music, who served for more than 25 years as a professor at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. So, we move right into Go Tell It on the Mountain, which begins with its refrain. blessed Christmas to you and to yours, and have a joyous day.